Good morning and welcome back to day 2 of the British National Diving Cup of 2023. I'm Jack Haslam and I will be taking you through the commentary of today's events. We are kicking off this morning with a men's 3 metre preliminary. I'm very excited for one to see some of the divers in this event today. We've got the likes of our multi-Olympic medalists of Jack Law. Last year we had some amazing results in the international scenes, seeing the likes of Dan Goodfellow win the Commonwealth Games. He of course will be here competing this morning. Jordan Holden had a real breakthrough year last year. One of his questions over the few years has been his consistency, but last year he showed his consistency throughout multiple events and ended the year with a European medal. Got some of the big names. Ross Haslam, someone surprisingly enough I know pretty well. He returns after a year out of injury. Recovered from shoulder surgery and a stress fracture on his lower spine, so I for one am hoping to see some good diving from him. Of course we've got some young juniors in the meet as well. The likes of Oscar Kane, Todd Gegas, Leon Baker, all represented GB at Junior Europeans or the Junior Worlds last year, coming away with some really good results. You can see now our divers out for their parade. They've just been finishing off their warm-ups. Judges are all in place and set to go. So let's get the event up and on the way. Start 1 from Dive London, we have Hugo Thomas. Start 2 is Ross Haslam from the City of Sheffield Diving Club. His teammate also from the City of Sheffield Diving Club, Declan Rogan, is in start 3. Start 4 from Plymouth is Oliver Heath. Again, another teammate from Plymouth, Ewan McCabe, in start 5. Oscar Wilcox from City of Sheffield in start 6. Brian James from Southampton Diving Academy in start 7. Danny Mabbott from Edinburgh, obviously diving here in his home pool. Start 9, Johan Eskrick Parkinson from Jamaica. Start number 10, Yasan Sinjab from Dive London. Familiar face, Jack Law, start number 11 from Dive Leeds. Jordan Holden, City of Sheffield Diving Club in start 12. Start 13, we've got another guest from Ireland, but actually trains in the City of Leeds, Jake Passmore. Start 14 is Conor Lano from Southend. Start 15 is Lucas Clayton from Dive London. Start 16 is Lachlan Stark from Edinburgh Diving Club. Start 17, Leon Baker from Southampton. Start 18, Hamish Patel from Dive London. 19 is Nathan Bull from Southampton Diving Academy. 20, Todd Gegas from Southend Diving Club. Another guest, start number 21, is Juho Jintala. Oscar Kane, start number 22 from Dive London. Moving towards the back end of the start list, Noah Penman from Aberdeen. And in 24th is Maxwell Spencer from Dive London. James Heatley, another very familiar face from Edinburgh Diving here in his home club. Number 25, and holding up the back end of the field is Dan Goodfellow from the City of Leeds Diving Club. Of course, James is here in his hometown club, so he should be nice and familiar with these boards. Another man who we can speak about in very high regards. Over the years, he's just kept progressing and progressing. We've seen some real big scores in this event over the last few years. Seems to be going from strength to strength. If you were joined us yesterday, we obviously had the 10-metre platform synchro events. Today we are down on the 3-metre for all our events. This morning we have obviously got the men's 3-metre prelim, and then this afternoon we have the final, joined with the women's 3-metre synchro final too. So get a little bit of a different type of diving today. Yesterday we're up on the high boards on the 10-metre. Today we've got a little bit of extra complexity of using the springboard as well, which can mean some things go a little bit more wrong at certain occasions. The hurdle steps bring in that extra risk for the divers. You've got to make sure you get right on the end of that board so you get the full height and spring out of the diving board to make sure you can fit all your somersaults and twists in that these divers will be doing. Similar to yesterday, the divers will have to cover all 5 groups. The boys do 6 dives in their list, so the 6th dive can be a choice of theirs of any one of the groups, from forward, inward, back, reverse and twist. It's a nice event, this one, to see a bit of a variety of dives. We see dives all the way up to the 3.9 degree of difficulty, which is the forward 2.5 somersaults with 3 twists. That's right up at the upper end. The lower end, I think, is the easiest dive we may see today, is the forward 2.5 somersaults pike in terms of degree of difficulty. So again, as I've said, the judges in place. Always good to give our judges a huge shout out. This event couldn't go ahead without them. So even though sometimes they might be the diver's enemy if they don't get what they feel they may deserve on the dive, we really do thank them for coming and helping out with this competition. Now just waiting for Hugo, our first diver of the event, to kick us off, and we'll be up and running. Hugo up on the board, ready to go for round 1 of the men's 3-metre preliminary. Just moving the fulcrum on the board. For those of you that don't know, the fulcrum just alters the spring a little bit of the diving board, so sometimes depending on the weight and the strength of a diver, you may choose to put it in certain directions. Obviously the closer it is to the end of the board, the tighter the board, the tighter it makes the board, so the more you'll have to push it to get the flexion on the springboard. Hugo's starting off his list with an inward 2.5 somersaults pike. This one's a 3.0 degree of difficulty. We'll see a forward 4.5 from Hugo later on in his list, which is up there with the 3.8. It's a steady start there from Hugo. Sometimes getting yourself into the competition is one of the hardest things. Your nerves may be the highest on that first dive, so making sure you get in with a steady start is really important. Hugo's entry wasn't quite as clean as he may have hoped there, so that's why we've only seen the 5.5 from the judges. Next up, Ross Haslam. This time another standing dive. Instead of spinning inwards, he's going to be spinning backwards with a back 2.5 somersaults pike, the same degree of difficulty at 3.0. And it's a lovely start from Ross. This dive's a difficult one to start on because sometimes, as I said before, with the nerves, you can overpump that takeoff and let your legs come over. And just over-rotate on this dive. Ross has kicked his legs out nice and early at the water, squeezed his arms back behind his ears and disappeared through the water. It's a great start from Ross. Next up, his teammate, Declan Rogan. Back on the inward 2.5 somersaults, this time in the tuck position. So slightly down on the degree of difficulty at 2.7. You know, Declan's been increasing his degree of difficulty over the last few months, so we'll see a few new dives from him in this list. Did really well at the British Nationals in May and Sheffield. Great dive from Declan. Balanced on the board is very good. He stayed nice and upright on the start, which is very important to make sure you don't stick your bum back and fly out into the middle of that pool. Get balance and control of the dive. Very steady start from Declan. Sure he'll be very happy with that one. Nice dive. Next up we have Oliver Heath. He's doing the same dive. Notice so far we've only had standing starts. I mentioned previously that the hurdle steps can be a real challenge, so like I said, getting into that competition with a nice standing dive is an option that a lot of divers tend to take. And Oliver just lets that dive drift slightly over from vertical. His tuck shape was beautiful when he was spinning around. He squeezed in really tight, his knees close together. Just let it over-rotate slightly, which is why we've just seen a little bit lower marks. But some really good stuff in there in that dive to take away from Oliver. Ewan McCabe from Plymouth, another really strong diver. We see him do some of the hardest dives up on the 10 metre as well, so it's a real talent to be able to do both the 3 metre and the 10 metre with them being so different. In between half pipe for him, very nice start. Great entry through the water. Came out nice and early, had a little look where he was in the air, and then finished it off nice and clean through the water. Oscar Wilcox from City of Sheffield Diving Club. Again with the in-between half somersaults pike. And good steady start there from Oscar. Just finished the dive a little bit lower than some of his competitors, but again put the dive in the water with very little splash. So it's a great entry from him there. Gets the 6s from the judges. Get those higher marks. Maybe just needs to stand the dive up a little bit taller, so you get a little bit more height and finish the dive up a little bit higher. But Oscar's only a young diver. He's only just in the last few years learning these dives, so to be here competing themselves is a great achievement. Our first hurdle dive of the event. Forward 3.5 somersaults tuck. Brilliant. And a nice steady start from Brian as well. Like I said before, the hurdle steps sometimes can be very daunting. You have to really attack the end of the board, almost like when you're doing long jumps, sprint as fast as they can towards the platform. In diving, you've got to jump as high as you can onto that end of that board so you can get as high as you can into the air, which sometimes means your feet aren't quite where they want to be on the end of the board. Danny back to the inward 2.5 somersaults pike. And very nice entry from Danny. Great jump out the board. Didn't rotate as fast as he may have liked, but held on the perfect amount of time, came out and drilled the entry. So we see good scores there from Danny. Johan Eskrik Parkinson. Forward 3.5 somersaults pikes. This was a 3.1, the highest degree of difficulty so far. And it's a very good start from Johan. Johan is actually the synchro partner of Yona Knight Wisdom as well, who obviously we are missing here today. Another Jamaican, but we've come to see him a very familiar face at our nationals as he trains in Edinburgh currently, Leeds in the past. And Yona is actually coaching Johan today as well, so nice pairing there, synchro and having a coach. Standing start here again, in between half somersaults tuck from Jessen. Another beautiful entry through the water. Sometimes these first round dives, often very consistent. Divers tend to put the dives that they're most comfortable with, get them into the competition without any drops. Steady starts, get scores on the board, and then the riskier ones come later on in the competition. Now we're up in the ante a little bit. Jack Law with his forward 2.5 somersaults with 2 twists. This one's a 3.4 degree of difficulty. So easy from Jack. You wouldn't think this was a 3.4 with the amount of time he has when he comes out of that shape. Just lets it drift slightly over. So that's why we're only seeing the 6s to count from the judges. So probably a slight drop in Jack's eyes. Normally we've come accustomed to see him scoring big marks on this dive. Jordan with the same dive. Again, up in the ante, up to 3.4 degree of difficulty now. Beautiful entry from Jordan. I think he held onto that dive so well. I don't know if you could see when he stepped down on the end of the board, his toes just looked like they were slightly over the end, so he had a real challenge to make sure he didn't fly out into the middle of the pool. He stood it up nicely, and there we see the 8s. Great start from Jordan. That's going to put him into the lead for now. Jake Passmore dives in City of Leeds, as we mentioned before, represents Ireland. Came 5th at the Junior Worlds last year. Just missed out on a medal by, I think it was only around 3 points, so a great achievement for him. Looking really strong. Nice forward 2.5 somersaults with 1 twist, so just taking 1 twist out from the dive we've just seen from Jack and Jordan, but very, very nicely executed from Jake. Connor from Southend, forward 2.5 somersaults pike. This one's just 2.4. And as you can see, Connor makes it look very easy, stands it up nice and tall in the air, squeezes into that pike shape, then comes out very early and has a look at the water. 6.5 from the judges, just a little bit cleaner through the water, may have seen him get higher scores, but nice steady start into the dive. Next up, Lucas with a back 2.5. We've seen this once previously from Ross Haslam. And Lucas manages to get it upright with relatively little splash being thrown up. The judges are going to penalise him a little bit. I think the takeoff was slightly scrappy, just threw his head back a little bit. So that's why we only see the lower marks from the judges. Did really well to make sure that that dive went in through the water without very much splash, but just throughout the air we just see a few different changes which makes the dive look a little bit harder, which is why we see those slightly lower marks. Like Clint with an inward 1.5 somersaults pike. This one's a 2.1, so I was slightly mistaken at the start when I said that the forward 2.5 was the lowest degree of difficulty of the competition. 7.5 from the judges, so even though the difficulty wasn't that high, we still get good scores there. Leon Baker, Southampton, forward 3.5 somersaults pike. Again, nice dive from Leon. Another hurdle step that didn't look perfect onto the end of the board. It just looked like he was on the corner closest to our cameras, but still managed to hang on. He's got strong legs, so he pushed himself nice and high up into that air. And then good entry through the water as well. Hamish with an in 2.5 somersaults pike. Oh, tuck, sorry. 2.7. And a nice dive from Hamish. When divers spin tuck dives, there's a couple of options to come out of the shape. They can either go straight from the tuck shape to a straight line, so we call that like a punch out. Hamish opts for a pike out, where he comes out through a pike shape, so his tuck shape turns into a pike shape with his arms in a T and then straightens his body out. Nathan with a forward 3.5 somersaults pike. And a good dive from Nathan. I mention it most times when I see Nathan's diving. I love his shapes. They're so tight. Squeezes really tight into that pike shape. His chest is flat on his legs. The judges can see no gap between. Next up we've got Todd. Came second at the Junior Europeans last year. A great achievement from him. It was only in the Group B category as well. But he's done very well to deal with that hurdle step. You may notice that it looked like he was about a foot off the end of the board, which means that you can't get full flexion on that springboard. And then subsequently that means that the dive is not going to go as high as you want it to. So Todd dealt with that pretty well. Could have been a lot worse from that situation. Yuho with an in-between half somersaults pike. Guest from Tirat diving team. A good dive from Yuho. Again, not much wrong with that. Good balance from the board. Maybe just liked a little bit of height. That was going to see the 8 marks, but very tidy, good entry. So we see steady 7s from the judges. Doesn't look too happy with that. I'm not sure. Wanted a little bit more on the dive. 63 points to start off the competition though. A very steady score to get going. Next up, we've got Oscar, another young diver, represented Team GB at the Junior Worlds last year. He came 5th in the Group B category. The event seemed pretty tight at Junior Worlds last year. He was only 10 points off a medal as well. And with the in-between half pike there, we see the challenge with this dive sometimes is that as you're spinning around the board, you don't want to come too close and clip those toes on the springboard. So there's a real fine balance between ensuring you're close enough to the springboard to make sure you get the full height and balance that you need, but also not too close to make sure your feet come close to the board. Noah's next up, same dive. Interesting there from Noah. You can see the slight difference there between Noah and Oscar. Noah's just stood it up a little bit taller in the air, so he actually got more height out of the board. Just meant he needed to squeeze into that shape a little bit more because he was slightly slow, and sometimes when you are really working hard to speed the dive up, you can tuck your head in and lose your awareness in the air. So that's why potentially you may have seen him just roll slightly over. Maxwell Spencer, Dive London. Seen the first of our back twisting dives. About 1.5 somersaults, 2 twists. And a lovely entry into the water. If you can hear that, made a great sound as he hit the water. Hear those hands clapping as they connect with the water. They call the entries when they go through the water with very little splash a rip entry, as it sounds. James Heatley, Edinburgh Diving Club, of course. Back 2.5 somersaults pike. The easiest dive in his list, in terms of degree of difficulty at least. And a great start from James, very accurate. Said when some of these dives are really strong and it means that the back 2.5 is almost too easy for them in some cases. So it's really important that they're able to control the dive, come out in the right place and keep the water down on the entry. James has done just that. Dan Goodfellow, our last diver of the first round, with 4 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists. Another big name in this competition. And a great entry from Dan as well. We see a slightly different technique on this dive from a few of our divers. Some squeeze into that pike shape first and then flick out at about 1.5 somersaults to do the 2 twists before re-piking and looking for the water. Dan doesn't really make a pike shape with his arms closed behind his legs, more of a T pike shape, and then flicks out. So there we go, we can see our results after the first round. Jordan Holden giving himself a little bit of a cushion after one round. Started his list off with a 3.4, so a little bit higher up on the degree of difficulty to some of his competitors. But his list is a very, very high degree of difficulty list. We're going to see a few variations in this round. Some harder dives. We kicked the round off with our hardest dive yet with a reverse 3.5 somersaults tuck from Hugo. Very impressive for him to be doing this at such a young age as well. Got to be very strong to ensure you get all the height out of the board to squeeze those somersaults round. So I'm very impressed that Hugo's already managing to compete this dive. As I've already mentioned, he's got the forward 4.5 coming up later in the competition too. And there we see the complexity of this dive. You've got to get so many things right to ensure that dives as difficult as this are executed well. Hugo just let that drift out into the water a little bit, which meant they really had to squeeze into those somersaults to try and fit them all in. And he's just got a little bit lost and kicked his feet slightly too high, and that's why we see his legs drift over from vertical. Ross Haslam up in his ante again, 3.4, inward 3.5 somersaults tuck. Another good dive from Ross. Mentioned the punch out or the pike out on the inward 3.5. Ross has gone for a little bit more of a punch there, but very accurate on the water. Good steady start again from Ross. What you need in these prelims. Declan. Again with a 3.5 somersaults tuck. This time forwards. I see Declan's on the taller side for divers. Sometimes we expect a very nice dive from Declan. Again, very accurate. I've always been very impressed with Declan's ability to keep his consistent performances in competition. Sometimes stepping up to a senior nationals can be quite a nervy process, but Declan doesn't seem to be phased. Very accurate in that dive. Yeah, as I was saying, the stature of some of these divers is varied. We see the likes of Yona in the past, obviously a very tall diver. There's quite a few tall divers in this event, which sometimes can be a challenge. Don't necessarily spin as fast, but obviously have more weight. Oliver Heath with a beautiful reverse 2.5 somersaults tuck. So great to see someone kick out where he did and then drill that entry. Judges are just going with the 6.5, maybe just needed a little bit more tidying up the edges, a little bit more form through his toes and his legs to just get those extra marks, but the entry through the water was beautiful. Ewan, forward 3.5 somersaults pike. Just those hurdle steps starting to give slight difficulties. Didn't quite get all the height out of the board that he may have wanted, so it's always just working a little bit harder than he would have wanted to be towards that entry. Oscar Wilcox, Forward 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist. And a very nice dive from Oscar. Makes this look very, very easy. I can assure you it's not. Again, like I mentioned before, when they're doing the forward 2.5 somersaults with 1 twist, also known as the full out amongst the divers. So if you hear that phrase, that's what it's referring to. Brilliant, with the back 2.5 somersaults tuck. This is the first one we've seen of this dive. 2.8 degree of difficulty. Another nice entry there. We'll see, probably looking at the 6 mark from the judges. Good entry through the water, just lacked a little bit of height to give the judges the wow factor to get more scores. Another Edinburgh diver in Danny. Forward 3.5 somersaults pike. A good clean entry through the water. I really liked his pike shape. His chest was flat on his legs, which is great to see. Sometimes you can see the divers spin around. You can see a gap between the chest and the legs, which means they're probably going to spin a little bit slower because of the difference in the size of the shape. Johan, mentioned previously, obviously doing synchro with Jona. You can see why they would be good. Very similar in stature. And a very, very nice start. Looked very calm into the dive. Relaxed, just kicked his feet out a little bit too early. Didn't quite reach his arms back enough to keep that water down. But it makes the dive look easy. He's very composed. Just maybe on that one, slightly too composed. Excited to see him now, Johan. Although with the guests, we can only get a maximum of 2 through. So if they are in the top 8, then one of them will miss out. Next up, we have Yasin with a forward 3.5 somersaults tuck. Wow, Yasin did very, very well to hang on to the end of that board. As he stepped down from the hurdle, you can almost see the slight panic because his toes were just over the end. But he did still manage to push down the springboard and get up in the air and get the dive off, which is a challenging thing in that position. So Jack, with a reverse 3.5, is 14.5 somersaults with 2 twists. Wasn't the score that he would have been wanting, but with his list of dives can easily recover. And we'll see that there. Absolutely beautiful from Jack. It's just so easy. You see a reverse 3.5 done earlier on in the competition, and you can really see how hard the dive is. Jack finishes that at 3 meters. He kicks his feet out and drills the entry. So great recovery from that slight drop. Still 61 points on the first dive, so it wasn't a massive drama, but Jack will have come to expect 80 points plus on that first round dive, so great recovery from him. Our current leader, Jordan Holden, in with 3.5 somersaults tuck. Again, pretty accurate from Jordan. One thing that's been really impressive with Jordan over the last year is the improvement in his consistency. He's always been able to do these big dives. He's so strong and spinny, so he can make the big dives with ease. It's just been a case of making sure he can compete them all consistently well. And last year he had a fantastic year doing that, and I think it's really been a breakthrough for his mental capacity in the diving competitions as well, to have the confidence to keep doing that. Jake in between 2.5 somersaults pike. Nice dive there from Jake. Just drifted slightly away from the board, so it made the dive just finish a little bit lower on the water than he may have wanted. But again, it was a good entry through the water, slightly short of vertical, just because didn't quite make it as easy as he would have liked. Connor with a forward 3.5 somersaults tuck. Just slightly short of vertical there. Thought it was going to be very nice in the air. Great tuck shape, piked out with plenty of time to have a look at the water. Just then lifted his chest up a little bit, and there we can see the splash just throwing off his chest. So that's why we only see the lower marks. Next up, Lucas. Verse 2.5 somersaults tuck. This one's a 2.8. I've seen this a couple of times. And again, the good thing about this dive is sometimes when you see the divers kick out from their tuck shape, they're in a nice straight line and float round to a vertical position. So when it's performed nicely, it can look really, really impressive. Lucas, again, just needed to squeeze his arms back behind his ears to ensure he got all the way to vertical. Just left his arms slightly in front of his face, which means didn't quite get the rip entry he would have wanted. Lachlan, in between 2.5 somersaults pike. Great dive there. Again, we see a lovely pike shape. Comes out, has a look at the water and drills the entry. I think we'll see a few variety of scores there. Judge 3 didn't particularly like it. Reason for that may be that it just stayed slightly piked through the water. So although it went through with very little splash, because he wasn't in a perfect straight line, the judges have just penalised him a little bit. Leon, Junior European bronze medalist last year. Very accurate again from Leon. There's a few tidying up the edges of that dive, but spins really fast, got great balance on the start of the dive. Just needs to snap those legs out a little bit straighter through the water. And the judges will reward him with a few extra marks. Hamish, reverse 2.5 somersaults tuck again. We've dropped from the 3.4 of the 3.5 to the 2.8. Oh, great save from Hamish. Again, you can just see the hurdle step, as our friend Leon Taylor would say, hanging 10. I think that was hanging more than 10. Half his foot was over the end of the board there. So just to be able to get the dive in there is a good result there from Hamish. When you step down on the end of the board, if you're half of your feet, or half of your foot is over the end of the board, then it's really hard to make sure you push into the springboard without slipping. Hamish has just managed to get enough purchase off the board and fit his somersaults in. Oh, Nathan with the back 2.5 somersaults pike. Just quite short there. Didn't quite have the spin speed or the kick timing that he would have needed. With that spin speed, he just needed to kick his feet up a little bit higher. Kicked his feet out too low, and then his rotations just stopped short. Todd, forward 3.5 somersaults pike. Great entry there from Todd. As I said, it's great to see some of our most talented juniors here at this event, putting the pressure on the more experienced divers. Todd's obviously doing really well on the junior scene, so great to see him transferring some of those dives to the senior events. New Hope follows up his in-between half pike with a back 2.5 pike, so staying on the standing dives for now. And again, upright through the water. Just a few things that need just neatening up a little bit in his technique. Keeping that head down on the start Ensuring that you're watching your legs coming up will be one thing the judges will be looking for. Squeezing a little bit tighter in that pike shape. Another. Oscar Kane, forward 3.5 somersaults tuck. Again, those hurdle steps. Said they are such a difficult thing when you're already nervous and you've got a hard dive that you need to do. Walking down that board can be one of the scariest things. You know that if you land on the end of the board and it's not perfect, then you're leaving yourself a lot of work to be able to do. Now we're with the same dive from pike position. Forward 3.5 somersaults pike there from Noah. Just didn't quite fit all the somersaults in. There's some things in there to take away that to be proud of. The pike shape was great. The hurdle step again left him with a lot to do. And he just came out of that dive too early for how he was rotating in the air. He needed to squeeze on a little bit longer and then snap out at the 3.5 rather than coming out a little bit early and having a look. Didn't quite fit all the rotations in. Changing the dive up here with Maxwell. Forward 2.5 somersaults with 1 twist. Again, slightly shorter vertical. Maxwell's got to make sure he just waits on that diving board a little bit. Again, one of the taller divers that we've got. So it's really important that he uses his size to his advantage and he works that springboard, lets him jump up really high up in the air to fit those dives in. James Heatley, of course, in with 3.5 somersaults tuck. James been lucky enough to be over in Brisbane for a bit of a training camp over the last few months. And it's a lovely dive from James. Great entry through the water. He's been struggling with a bad back for a while, so great to see him get back into the competition. I know he's not potentially feeling in the best shape that he's felt over the last few years, but still doing some great diving. Dan's following up with the exact same dive. Be interesting to note the technique difference between James and Dan. Dan is slightly lighter on the board than some of the other divers, so doesn't necessarily push the board as much, but he spins so fast and makes the dive so easily. So there you see the pike out, comes out a little bit early, then just has to stay in that pike shape a little bit longer. He doesn't quite get the entry through the water he would want. Dan's diving, another one that's so impressive. He spins so fast and his entries through the water are beautiful. See our results after 2 rounds. Jordan Holden still in that lead. Jack's gained some ground on him after that beautiful reverse 3.5 somersaults pike. Ross in 3rd. And then you can see up to 16th. Obviously, I mentioned previously that we can only have 2 guests in the final. So if our guests are in the top 8, then the 3rd guest will drop out. Currently, we have Leon in front of Jake, who is our guest in 7th. Yuho in 9th, the 2nd guest, and Johan, the 3rd guest, in 12th. So they've got their own little competition to compete against each other for those 2 spots in the final. Back to Hugo, up to his ante to a 3.5 in the previous round with his reverse 3.5. Didn't quite pay off with the total scores that he may have wanted. Down to 3.1 here, and that's more like it from Hugo. Again, great entry. Already said it's so impressive to see him doing the big dives at his age as well. First 3.5, forward 4.5, forward 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists, all in his list. all 3.4 and upwards. Now Ross, with his reverse 1/2 somersaults, 3.5 twists. This is the first of this dive we'll see. 3.5 degree of difficulty. And just slightly off on the entry from Ross. He's got so much elegance, Ross, when he's diving. His entries are really, really sharp. His positions often really sharp. Just looked a little bit unaware when he came out of that twist shape and just lost a little bit of tension in his middle body. So not the scores that he would have wanted on that one, unfortunately. Declan, another twisting dive. Forward 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists. Oh. Declan's newest dive in his list, this one. His hardest dive, and unfortunately his hurdle step has just let him down over the end of the board. Really hard. When you're doing such a big dive, you gotta make sure that hurdle step's perfect. Unfortunately there from Declan, not quite gone to plan. Oliver Heath, his last round dive was a reverse 2.5 somersaults top with a beautiful entry. This time spinning forwards, forward 3.5 somersaults tuck. Again, pretty accurate. Didn't quite get the entry that he got on the reverse 2.5. A few bits in there that, although just want to neaten up, a little bit of form in his toes when he's spinning around and kicks out of the shapes. Of course, the toes are the last things the judges see, so if your feet are flat, they're going to penalise you. Ewan with a different twisting dive this time. This one used to be a little bit more common. Reverse 2.5 somersaults, 1.5 twists. Used to be 3.4 degree of difficulty. We had a change of difficulty a few years ago to try and see a bit of a variety of twist dives that we see. So that one dropped down to 3.3, which is why we don't see it as commonly nowadays. Oscar, back 2.5 somersaults pike. Oh, what a beautiful entry there from Oscar. Absolutely disappeared through the water. Now the judges have gone with the 6s to count. Absolutely amazing entry. The reason we've only seen the 6s just in that pike shape is really important. You squeeze those legs tight so your knees don't bend. Oscar just had a little bit of a crimp to his knees, so that's why we've only seen those marks instead of higher that the entry itself deserved. Next up, Rian. Oh, being treated for some beautiful entries here. Another absolutely beautiful finish, just disappears through that water. So impressive to see. Like I mentioned before, reverse spinning dives, as Jack did earlier with an extra somersault as well. When they come out, kick to a straight shape or a dish shape, as we like to refer to it as, and then line it up, it can look so aesthetically pleasing. Danny Mabbott with a forward 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist, keeping the entries up. 3 out of 3. Great dives, boys. Yeah, it's up to Johan to keep that run going. We've had 3 out of 3 beautiful entries previously. Similar to the back 2.5 for Johan. He's so high up in the air, which is great to see. So impressive that he's got the strength to hold onto that board and let it spring him up into the air. Just again, left his feet a little bit low in the kick. Got to make sure he kicks his feet up slightly higher so he can get that vertical entry. We'll see the same dive here from Yasin, except this time in the tuck position. Difference in the tuck and pike positions is 0.2 on the degree of difficulty. This one's a 2.8. The pike shape is a 3.0. Nice dive there from Yasin. Once he got into that tuck shape, you can just see it start to motor, really speeds up, spinning nice and fast. And it's just really important that you make sure you kick your feet out at the right time when our divers are spinning round. There's different techniques of knowing where you are in the air. Some divers see certain things when they're spinning around, such as the water or the board. Other divers can feel, so you can notice when your hips and your head have rotated round past each other. And Jack with the inward 3.5 somersaults tuck. His first standing dive. Just slightly short of vertical from Jack. Something that potentially normally we don't see when he makes these dives so easily. It's normally the problem of stopping them. That time he's just not got the normal balance that he has. He's just let it drift a little bit further out into the pool than normal. Next up we've got our current leader, Jordan Holden. Reverse 3.5 somersaults tuck. Done well to hang on to the board there, Jordan. So obviously as he hasn't entered the water, we get a restart here. This means we'll have a 2-point deduction on scores that the judges give. Great recovery there from Jordan. Looks to be a great decision to stop. When you have a hurdle step like that, you can make a choice of trying to get it off anyway and saving the 2 points deduction, or doing exactly what Jordan did there. The judges will have marked it as they normally would, and then the 2 points have been deducted. So 7's there from the judges originally with the 2 points deduction. I think that was a very good decision from Jordan. Next up, Jake. Back 2.5 somersaults pike. Oh, great dive there from Jake. Really, really nice pike shape when he's spinning round. Beautiful leg line, toe point, then kicks his feet out at the perfect time. And a good entry through the water too. So good dive there from Jake. Now Connor, in with 2.5 somersaults tuck. Good dive there from Connor. This time we see the pike out, comes out at exactly the right time. When you pike out, the opportunity that that gives you is to just have a little look at the water, figure out where you are, how much time you've got, and then he opens his hips out to a straight line and lands nice and upright into the water. Lucas forward 2.5 somersaults pike. Good entry through the water. It's left it slightly short of vertical, but still managed to just absolutely disappear into that water. Oh, great hand technique from him there. When the divers hit the water, it's important that they keep the hands flat, and then you'll often see the 3 bubbles being made from the divers. That comes from when they hit the water. You flick your wrists to the side, break your arms straight, so you push the water down with you. As you can see there from Lachlan. Great entry again. You might see that entry and think, why do we not see higher scores there from the judges? Probably just because it doesn't finish quite as high. It's a little bit lower on the water when he finishes. Comes out and doesn't quite get a perfect straight line into the water. Just stays slightly piked to the hips, which is why we don't see the bigger scores. But like I said, the entry in the water itself is very clean. Now Leon the highest degree of difficulty dive so far. Forward 4.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, wow. Leon Baker with a beauty of a dive. Highest degree of difficulty, I said. Not phased him at all. 2 8s there. Unfortunately, they won't count from the judges. We have 7 judges. Our top 2 mark and our bottom 2 marks get taken off. 85 points there. Great dive from Leon. It's amazing to see. Hamish with a reverse 1.5 somersaults, 2.5 twists. And he's done very well again to make sure he's got all of that dive in. The hurdle step left him with a lot of work to do. Sometimes when you're over the end on a reverse twisting dive, I can speak from experience. I used to do the reverse 1.5 somersaults with 3.5 twists. It's really hard to get your awareness right when you're doing your twists if your feet are over the end of the board. So Hamish has dealt with that really, really well. Nathan had a bit of a drop in the last round with his back 2.5 somersaults pike. This time goes up to a 3.4 of the inward 3.5 somersaults tuck. And again, that shape just lets him spin so fast. So when he initially took off, I thought it might be quite difficult to get all those rotations in. Didn't quite get enough height off the board as he would have liked. Just let it sit back into the water a little bit too far. But because he squeezes into such a beautiful shape, it just speeds up when he's spinning around. So he manages to fit all those somersaults in, just lets it over-rotate slightly. Now Todd, back 2.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, again, lovely entry. I love seeing entries like that. One of the best things to watch in diving is when someone goes through the water with very little splash, in my opinion anyway. So, might have not been up there on the difficulty there from Todd, but the execution on the entry was beautiful. Yuho, forward 3.5 somersaults pike. All of his dives in his list are pike. And that's a very good dive there from Yuho. Upright on the water again with very little splash. Good hurdle step as well into the end of the board. Drops in with a nice straight line, so gives him every chance to jump nice and high in the air and fit all those rotations in. So good dive from Yuho. Oscar, reverse 1.5 somersaults, 2.5 twists. Just seen this previously from Hamish. Oh wow, very nice, Oscar. This is a dive that gives the athletes an opportunity to really show off a bit of class. So because you're spinning around in a straight line, it's really important to make sure those legs stay together. When you are twisting, it's hard to keep your legs together. You get a lot of G-force trying to pull your legs apart. Oscar manages to squeeze his legs together with beautiful leg line and finish that dive off really nicely. Now Noah again with the same dive but facing backwards. So as I just previously mentioned about the G-force of the legs coming apart, you can see that there from Noah. It just lets his legs split apart, which is why we see the judges penalise him a little bit. The dive itself was very nice. Again, another nice entry. Just those legs flying apart in the middle of the dive means the judges take a few scores off. Maxwell, reverse 2.5 somersaults pike. Similar to his last round dive, just didn't quite wait all the way for that springboard to push him up in the air. Both his second round dive and his third round dive, he pushes the springboard down really, really well. He's strong He just needs to make sure he waits until that springboard comes all the way back up to horizontal and lets him get the full height of the board. That'll just mean he can get all his rotations in. Unfortunately, because he just comes off the springboard a little bit early, means he doesn't get all that height, and therefore we've seen him land a little bit short on his rotation. James Heatley, forward 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists. Beautiful dive there from James. Whilst he was over in Brisbane, he had a little bit of a mental battle with this dive. The twist dives really are difficult mentally. Sometimes there's such a fine line between 1, 2, 3 twists. When you're spinning around, they're very similar feelings. So James had a little bit of a battle with that over in Brisbane, but as we can see there, not phased him here. Beautiful dive. Dan, reverse 3.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, Dan Goodfellow. Absolutely beautiful entry in the water. Saw him do a couple of these in training. Not quite. One of them wasn't quite like that. One of them was. He's taken the good one into the competition. Beautiful dive from Dan. First 9 of the competition. So we're at the halfway mark of the competition. You can see Leon Baker with that forward 4.5 somersaults has taken him into the lead. Jordan's dropped down a little bit, only 1.8 behind the lead after that restart. And there you can see the rest of your results. I won't try and read everyone's out. I'll let you read it yourself. I don't think I'll be able to keep up with that. So Hugo's ready to kick off our 4th round. And we see another one of our big guns, the forward 4.5 somersaults tuck. 3.8 degree of difficulty. Hugo just composing himself, giving himself time. Maybe run through that dive in his head before he takes off. It's a lot of dive to fit in there from Hugo. Just to be competing, this itself is an achievement. Doesn't quite fit all the rotations in, but it's a great place to be working from if he's already doing this dive. And he's got loads of opportunity to work on it and hopefully get the big scores, as we've already seen once in this competition from Leon. Ross is going to follow him up with the exact same dive. Forward 4.5 somersaults with tuck. Similar from Ross, just a little bit shorter vertical. Like I said, it's a lot of dive. Didn't quite get the hurdle step that he wanted to. Just here, when he lands on the board's not just in time with him. It was coming back at him, so you get a bit of a stomp. And that means you don't get all the height out of the board. So unfortunately for Ross, just doesn't quite get the scores that he will have wanted. And me being a biased brother would have wanted to. Declan, back 2.5 somersaults pike. Well done, Declan. It's difficult when you've done what he did in the previous round to keep your head composed. Sometimes can really get to you. Another one of Declan's new dives. Been competing this tuck in recent years. So now adding a little bit of difficulty to it. Taking it up to the 3.0 in the pike position. Oliver Heath. Seen this dive in the previous round. Back 1.5 somersaults, 2.5 twists. Another beautiful entry from Oliver. Again, just a few things to be neatened up, but a lot of the fundamentals are there for Oliver. Having a great rip entry is a talent in itself. Up to Ewan. Back 2.5 somersaults pike. Good dive from Ewan. Kicked his feet out very, very early, and it looked like it may have been slightly too early, but just arches back enough and squeezes his arms behind his ears to get the upright entry. Judges have just penalised him a little bit because of that adaptation. Oscar Wilcox doing the same dive but in the reverse direction. Actually reverse when you're spinning backwards, moving forwards. And another hurdle step that's just causing a few issues. Toes a little bit over the end of the board. Means you're really clinging on to make sure you don't slip, but you can still try and push the board. Just meant that Oscar can't get his full rotations in, left it hair short of vertical. Brian with an in 2.5 somersaults tuck. Back to the 2.7s. And nicely executed there. A lot of good things in that dive. The pike out and the rip entry being two of them. Balance from the board being another. It's a fine line, like I've previously said, between being too close to the board and the perfect distance. It's quite a difficult skill to be brave enough to stand up nice and tall on that start. Ensure you get that right. Danny with a back 2.5 somersaults pike, done really, really well there. He was a little bit slow in his rotation, but he kicked his feet up in the air and managed to sneak that entry in. So great awareness there from Danny. Sometimes when you're spinning a little bit slower, you might not realise and still kick your feet out a little bit too early. Danny's done very well to just hold on, kick his feet up in the air, and get a clean entry through the water. Johan with his big dive, forward 4.5 somersaults tuck. You've seen he's got the jump to get all these somersaults in, and also has good spin speed as well. See, as he gets into his second, third and fourth somersault, his spin speed just melts a little bit. Just unfortunately came out a little bit early of that rotation, so he's left it just a little bit on his chest. Just need to hold on a little bit more and then snap out of his shape a little bit later. Yasin, back 2.5 somersaults tuck. Another dive, London diver. Club seems to be growing and growing. It's great to see. That's a bit more like it from Yasin. Kicked his feet out really, really well. The divers will be doing lots of drills in the dry land to ensure that when they come out of these shapes, that they've got the strength in different body positions. Yasin did that really, really well. Just didn't reach those arms back behind his ears, as you might have been able to see there from the camera. It looks like that's what he was saying to his judges. To his coach. Now Jack is going to do the same dive, but with an extra somersault. So this really is, it's a 3.6, so it's not the highest degree of difficulty dive, but in terms of actual difficulty, it's definitely up in there. And it's a good dive from Jack. Again, he's gone a little bit up and down in this competition. His first round dive wasn't quite as good as he would have wanted. His second round dive was beautiful. His third round dive again was a slight drop. That was a little bit more like it. Perhaps not as clean through the water as we accustomed to seeing from Jack, but like I've mentioned, back 3.5 is such a difficult dive to do. And speaking of difficult dives, we've got our most difficult in terms of the degree of difficulty in the event. Forward 2.5 somersaults with 3 twists from Jordan. 3.9 degree of difficulty, so a huge one here. And Jordan snuck it in very well. Had his problems with his hurdle step in the last round. That one was much more like it. You can see Jordan himself is such a strong and spinny diver. Even he doesn't quite fit all that dive in there, just finishes a little bit low in the water. Really gives you a insight into how difficult that dive is. Jake with the forward direction, forward 3.5 somersaults pike. Another lovely dive there from Jake. You can see why he's up there competing for the medals in the Junior Worlds last year. Made that look very easy. Connor with a reverse 2.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, there's a lot to like about that start. When he stepped down from his hurdle step, you notice he's got a perfect straight line. If you were to draw a line between his fingers and his toes, there wouldn't have been much movement in that straight line, which is great to see. And it just gives the diver the opportunity to drop into the springboard and get loads of height, which he did. Just the rotation was slightly slower than he potentially would have wanted and just didn't kick the feet out at the right time. Lucas for 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist. Ooh, a lot going on there. A lot going on. When he comes out of his shape, just let his legs bend a little bit. So the judges are going to see that and penalise it quite heavily. If he'll manage to keep those legs straight. We've seen a few more marks from the judges. Lachlan, back 2.5 somersaults pike. Very nice there, very, very nice dive. Again, not necessarily the highest finishing dive, but the shape was very, very nice. He put his feet in exactly the right place and a good entry through the water as well. So a lot to like there from Lachlan. Now our leader. After the midway point, Leon, with that amazing forward 4.5 somersaults tuck in the third round. Drops his degree of difficulty right back down to the 3.0 here. Back 2.5 somersaults pike. And doesn't quite have the same wow factor that his last round dive did. Still steady, not a massive drop, but probably just not the scores that he would have wanted to. One of his talents is he is a strong lad. He's got the ability to do the hard dives. Sometimes when it comes to the easier dives, he doesn't quite show off the class as much as he may need to get those higher marks. So that's something that he can definitely add, but being able to do those hard dives is probably a harder thing to do. So he's already got that in his locker. Hamish with a nice back to half somersaults pike. Again, a lot to like in that. Sometimes when divers don't make this dive as easy, you can see them crimp their legs, go a bit bent knees in the pike shape. Didn't see that there from Hamish. Very, very nice pike shape. Back to the big dives. Forward 4.5 somersaults tuck from Nathan. Saw in his inward 3.5 somersaults tuck that once he gets into that tight tuck shape, his spin just rotates absolutely rapidly. And again there, it's very difficult. He does spin really, really fast, but doesn't quite get the height that he needs to fit all those somersaults in. But the technique in the shape and the start is very, very good. If Nathan could just build a little bit more strength, which I'm sure will come with a bit of age, and he'll be able to just give himself that half a metre extra off the springboard and be able to fit all that dive in. Todd. From the 3.8 down to the 2.8 for Todd. First 2.5 somersaults tuck. But again, very, very nice dive. We see the difference in the scores from the last dive to that. Obviously, the degree of difficulty was much higher for the forward 4.5, but if you can execute the dive well like Todd's just done, you're going to get higher scores overall. So it's a real trade-off between going for the difficult dives and making sure your execution marks are nice and high. Yuho doing the same dive in the pike position, so an extra 0.2 on the degree of difficulty. And another good dive from Yuho. He's been pretty consistent throughout this morning so far. Again, the 5.5, 6 to count with the height that he gets, and the pike shape was good there. Just needs to keep that head down on the takeoff. Back to one of our young junior divers, Oscar. Back 2.5 somersaults tuck. Again, a lot of nice things to take from that dive. On that takeoff, just could do with just standing up a little bit taller, pushing his hips up and over that board a little bit more. That'll just give him a little bit extra height and balance that he will need. In the air itself, the dive was very good. Tuck shape and the kick out, very good. So just helping himself finish a little bit higher in that dive is going to help get the higher marks in the future. Noah's going to do the same dive. Very nice dive again from Noah. Similar thing, great tuck shape, great kick out. This time I'd say Noah's balance was slightly closer to the board, which is good. Now Maxwell, back 2.5 somersaults pike. We mentioned in the previous couple of rounds that just needs to wait for that springboard. He's got the stature to really push the springboard down, so he just needs to wait for it to come all the way back up to push him a bit higher up in the air. Then get all those rotations in. That was a little bit more like it from Maxwell. The last two dives just went a little bit short on the rotation. That one still very, very slightly short, but much more like it. Obviously with the standing dives, not going to get as much height. So you really, really need to ensure that all your technique is perfect. Now James, with the second of his twisting dives. Reverse 1.5 somersaults, 3.5 twists. This one's 3.5. Again, similar to Jordan, see when very different for the reason for the stoppage. James looked like he had a bit of a knee buckle there, so when he went to push into his leg before he drives his hurdle knee up, his leg's just given way a little bit. So done well again to ensure that he's not gone into the water. And good recovery from James. Again, the second hurdle step itself, again, wasn't exactly what he would have wanted. His toes went a little bit over the end of the board. So unfortunately, really, really difficult, this dive from there, because you have to stand it up so steep. So you only have 1.5 somersaults with 3.5 twists. You have to make sure you stand the dive up steep so you don't rotate too fast for your spin speed in the twist. If you rotate too fast in your somersaults, then by the time you finish your 3.5 twists, you're already done more than 1.5 somersaults. Dan with the biggest dive of the competition again. Forward 2.5 somersaults, 3 twists. And again, another dive just a little bit over the end of the board on the hurdle step, so that's why you can see Dan just shoot out a little bit further into the water than he perhaps would have liked. Sometimes though, when you do have that lean, can help you with your spin speed. Leans can help the rotation speed pick up. So although it's not what the judge is looking for, sometimes it can help you get all those rotations in. So it's pretty tight up at the top there. Jack with 2.67 in the lead. Only 10 points between him and third place. Leon's just dropped down after that dive. Was top after the third round, of course. And it's our top 8 divers through to the final. Of course, if there are guests in the top 8, then they will take a spot and it will be pushed down to the next ranking. So if you have one guest in there, obviously the top 9 divers will qualify, 2 guests in there, the top 10. Currently our guests qualifying are Jake and Yuho, both in the top 8. So Hugo saw a big dive from the last round. Another one here, 42.5 results, 2 twists. And that's much more like it from Hugo. Great entry through the water. A few things to neaten up in the air, a little bit more leg form in that pike shape. That's probably why we see a bit of a split from the judges. But overall, good dive. Now Ross, reverse 3.5 somersaults took. A little bit of a drop in the last round, so let's hope he can recover. Yeah, another big dive, 3.5. Oh, that's more like it from Ross. Great entry through the water. Like I mentioned, he's so sharp at times. Doesn't necessarily get the best takeoff there, but really snapped his arms back on the entry, kicked out at the perfect time and drills through that entry. So I, for one, am very happy with that. Declan, reverse 2.5 somersaults pike, another one of his new dives in his list. Not bad from Declan, not bad at all. Again, we mentioned a few times that when the divers are a little bit taller, it's really important to make sure they use that springboard. Got to wait a little bit longer, like push the springboard down a little bit more. So Declan's done really well. There's a lot of body there to rotate around in the pike shapes. Oliver with a back 2.5 somersaults tuck. This time we are down to the 2.8. Oh, bit of a shame there from Oliver. Seen some really good entries from him so far this competition. Not quite on that one. I've mentioned previously the back standing starts obviously don't get quite the same height as the hurdle steps, so might get that extra bit of nerves on the hurdle approaches, but it's really important to make sure you get all the height that you can on the standing dives to fit those dives in. Ewan with the reverse 3.5 somersaults tuck. Another big dive here from Ewan. Spins so fast. Strong boy Ewan is. Mentioned as well that he has done the platform and the springboard in previous years, so good to see him doing both disciplines. Oscar with a very nicely executed forward 2.5 somersaults pike. Easiest dive in his list, but very important that you keep the execution marks high, which he has done. Just need a little bit more balance there to get him even higher, but in the air on the water, very nice dive. Good dive there from Brian. Forward 2.5 somersaults with 1 twist. 3.0 degree of difficulty, which is the highest in his list. Next up, Danny Babbitt. Reverse 2.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, that's a real shame. When he stepped down in that hurler step, I thought he was in a perfect position to really, really push it up in the air and show off this dive. He's got really good entries as Danny, so this dive's one of the dives that's a real good opportunity to show those entries off. Unfortunately, just let it go out into the water a little bit too far, so his distance from the board was a bit too far, and then kicked his feet up a little bit too high. Johan, in with 3.5 somersaults tuck. Nice dive there from Johan. Bit of a mix-up in his list. It was the back and reverse pike, and then the forward and inward harder dives. Inward 3.5 and the forward 4.5. He doubles up on the forward spinning dives with his forward 3.5 somersaults hike as well. Sent towards the back end of his list. He's really up in the ante with his degree of difficulty. This one's a 3.0, and he finishes off with a 3.5 with the reverse 1.5 somersaults, 3.5 twists. So good step up there. Start the list with 4 tuck spinning dives. Now he's onto the pike with the forward 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist, and it's really hard from there. You might have heard in my voice just a little bit of a panic when he stepped down. When your feet are that far over the end of the board, so hard to push down on the springboard without slipping. Oh, Yasen's done well to get it in. Sometimes the decision is whether you stop and restart and go again if you believe that you can get higher marks than you're going to be able to if you're in a position that's not going to be able to get all the height out of the board. Jack with his forward 4.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, there we go from Jack. That's more like it. It's been a little bit of a mixed bag from Jack this morning, but as we would expect, first event of the season, really. British nationals in the winter is always one to get these divers into the season ready. Sometimes the difficulty is for certain divers that, because they have to do well at this event, that the peaking of their performance around the year is difficult to manage. Jordan Holden with a 3.6 back 3.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, again, it's a lot of dive. This is one of the dives that Jordan, when he does it well, can be one of the best in the world. Got a great tuck shape. He spins so fast, and he kicks his feet out and can drill that entry. Unfortunately, this morning, just leaves it a little bit short on the rotation. So another one from Jordan, slightly mixed bag again, similar to Jack. Oh, Jake Passmore has been very impressive this morning. Last 3 dives have all been very, very nicely executed. Back 2.5 pike, front 3.5 pike, and now reverse 2.5 pike. Will be followed by Connor with a back 2.5 pike. Another one who has a bit of a mix of dives. Some in the tuck position, some in the pike. The tuck ones, obviously, you can spin around a little bit faster and fit the somersaults in. When you go to the pike dives, like we've seen from Connor there, increases the difficulty and also means it's harder to fit everything in, which Connor struggled with there, unfortunately. Lucas with a forward 3.5 somersaults pike. And great entry there from Lucas. Just previously mentioned of the mix between the tuck and the pike dives. Lucas is another one. Got the reverse 2.5 tuck in there. The divers often will go from spinning the 2.5, well, the 2.5 in the back reverse and inward direction, and the 3.5 tuck in the forward direction, and then they move on to the pike rotations, and then after that, if they've got the physical capability, add another somersault in the tuck direction, in the tuck position in each direction. If I can get my words out. Lachlan there with the reverse 2.5 somersaults tuck, just drifted slightly over from vertical. A lot of good stuff in there again from Lachlan. Good strong kick out to that dish. Sometimes when divers come out of their shapes, it's really important to show off the judges that you're confident, knowing where you are. Now Leon with another one of the big dives. Reverse 3.5 somersaults tuck. And another pretty accurate dive from Leon. Very impressive that the bigger dives have actually been his higher execution marks too. So sometimes we may expect that the lower degree of difficulty dives would get the higher execution marks, but for Leon, a bit of an anomaly. His highest execution marks have come on his hardest dive. Hamish, diver number 18, forward 3.5 somersaults pike. Well executed there from Hamish. Another diver who finishes up with his harder dives in the last 2 rounds. This one is hardest at 3.1. So should be happy that he's got that into the entry nice and clean, not throwing up very little splash. Now Nathan, reverse 2.5 somersaults pike. Oh, it's a shame there from Nathan. You may also notice the hurdle step difference between some of the divers. Some divers choose to do a walking hurdle, so, or a step hurdle they would call it. So when they're walking down the board, they just literally walk into that last step and push and drive the knee up into the hurdle. Other divers choose to do a bounce hurdle step, so into that 4th step, you see a little jump onto one leg and then a jump onto the hurdle step. So that might be something for Nathan to consider, just to get a little bit more height out of the board. Todd with an inward 2.5 somersaults tuck. Again, another good entry. Just drifted a little bit further away from the board than the judges would have liked. It's important to stay really brave when you push down on the takeoff. You've got to keep your chest up tall rather than letting yourself drift back. Now Yuho, been very consistent so far this morning. He's got a forward 2.5 somersaults 1 twist, the full out. It's a good dive from Yuho. He's going to get penalised from the judges for the hurdle step. Just had to cling onto the end of that board. So you see he didn't swing his arms as you normally would see. Kept his arms up by his ears. Oscar Kane, reverse 2.5 somersaults tuck. Very nice dive from Oscar. Really enjoyed watching that one. A lot of good stuff in there. His leg line's very impressive. His toe point's very impressive. And of course, the rip entries as well to finish it off. Good dive in there from Oscar. Now Noah. following exactly the same order as Oscar. And again, another really impressive dive. Although these dives are a little bit easier on the degree of difficulty, I still really enjoy watching them when they're executed like Noah and Oscar have just done. Great tuck shapes, great leg line, good form, really show the elegance of the dive off. Now we up the DD back to the 3.1 with the forward 3.5 somersaults pike from Maxwell. It's a similar story a little bit for Maxwell from the previous rounds. Just left it slightly short in his rotations. One thing for him to work on going forward is just getting a little bit more height out of the board. He looks strong enough to be able to do it. Just a little bit more composure by waiting and being patient for that board to spring you up. Hopefully something that he can learn to do. Now James, reverse 3.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, there we go from James. That hurdle step was much, much more like it than his previous dive. One of the really impressive things about James is usually now if he gets that takeoff right, his awareness is very, very good. He's very good at managing to get those upright finishes as he has just done there. So great dive there from James. Now Dan, forward 4.5 somersaults tuck. Another big dive, 3.8 degree of difficulty. Oh, wow. Everything about that dive from the takeoff looked really impressive. When you see him step down from his hurdle, I got a little bit excited. He was in a perfect position to be able to put it up. Great balance, great height. And then he's got the spin speed to fit all those rotations in and also get a good entry too. So great dive there from Dan. So there's the results after our penultimate round. Jack out in the lead there, in first with 3.53. Our top 8 obviously will go through to the final. We've currently got Jake and Yuho in there too. So at the moment, Hugo in 10th position will be going through to the final too. And Jake and Yuho will be our guests. Of course, that may change in our last round. Ewan, Danny, Brian, Oscar will all be looking to put a bit of pressure on. As well as Lachlan. Johan's got a little bit of making up to do on Yuho and Jake to be able to take one of those guest spots. So Hugo with his last dive of the competition, back 2.5 somersaults pike. And a great dive to finish on from Hugo. That's a little bit more like it from him. Represented GB at the Junior Europeans last year. Won the Junior Elites in Group A last year. That dive's a little bit more of a reflection of what he is capable of. Great dive to finish off from Hugo. Ross's last dive. Great 5th round dive, the reverse 3.5 somersaults tuck. Now onto the forward 2.5 somersaults with 2 twists, and that is beautiful from Ross. One of the dives that pretty confident with him. Executing very well most times. Probably be looking for more of the 8s in the final later on, Will Ross, but for the prelim there we go. We'll get him safely through to that final and hopefully build his confidence and pick up those scores later on. Declan with his last dive. It's been a little bit of a mixed bag for Declan. Started off the competition really well, nice and consistent. Just as he's stepped up the degree of difficulty a little bit, Had a bit of a variety of dives, which is as to be expected when you're increasing the difficulty of your dives. Obviously you're increasing the risk, you're increasing the nerves, a lot of different factors come into play. So hopefully it's a bit of a learning curve for Declan. Did really well to final at the British Nationals in May. Oliver Heath with his last round dive. 2.5, so a bit lower down on the degree of difficulty. Forward 1.5 somersaults, 2 twists. Again, nicely executed from Oliver. His entries through the water look pretty good. With some of these easier dives, I think it's important for Oliver just to focus a little bit more on some of his form when you're doing the easier dives. To get those scores from the judges, you really need to show off a bit of elegance. Ewan, forward 2.5 somersaults, 2 twists. And he spins so fast, Ewan. Absolutely rapid in both his rotations from his somersaults and his twists. So makes that dive pretty easily despite not the best takeoff. Just let it drift out a little bit forward into the water. So his distance from the board is a little bit more than you would have liked, but makes the dive with ease. Oscar Wilcox, forward 3.5 somersaults, pike. Oh, he's done well to squeeze that in. Grimacing a little bit when he steps down from the hurdle. Feet over the end of the board. So you can see that instead of pushing off the board and getting the height out of the springboard, just kind of drops. So it's really hard to squeeze all those 3.5 somersaults in there. Brilliant. Back 1.5 somersaults with 2.5 twists. Another dive that done well. Can really show off the elegance of a diver. Can he put a bit of pressure on at the top 8 GB divers? Not bad at all from Brian. He's not going to do him any harm. Might mean that divers above him are going to have to drop a little bit. 50 points there. 6 is on a bit of a lower degree of difficulty dive, so leaves him with a bit of work to do, but some really good stuff in there from Brian. Now Danny with his 3.4, his hardest dive of his list. Finishes up. And a very good dive from Danny as well. Might be his hardest dive in his list, but he's executed it very well. And we've seen a nice consistent score from our judges. 6s all across the board. Love to see that. All our judges in agreement, which is not the most common occurrence. Johan's following up with the same dive. Shown a lot of promise, Johan. Does those big dives. His technique's pretty good to wait for that springboard, and he's also, when he gets into that tuck shape, he can spin on some of his bigger dives. So there's a lot of potential in there for Johan. Just hasn't put it all together today, this morning. But I'm sure it'll take some learning for him. Hopefully he'll be representing Jamaica some competitions internationally. Now Yasen's biggest dive. Bit of a step up this one. Up to the 3.5. So previously his highest degree of difficulty was 3.0 in the last round. Now we go all the way up to 3.5. So it's a big step up. Hopefully he can get that execution. And he's got all this twists in. Just again, those hurdle steps. I keep saying it. Sound like a bit of a broken record, but they're so important. And when you're doing a big dive like that, if your feet are slightly over the end of the board and pushes you too far out into the middle of the pool, then you're just going to struggle to fit all those rotations in. So great that Yasin's doing that dive. 3.5 in itself is one of the harder in people's lists, so good starting point. Talking of hard dives, Jack Lowe with a forward 2.5 somersaults with 3 twists, and we say it's a hard dive, but Jack doesn't make that look hard. Absolutely beautiful dive. So even with a bit of a mixed bag, Jack still gets a great score of 4.41. Just shows his class there, finishing off his prelim with a beautiful dive. And Jordan finishes off his prelim with a forward 4.5 somersaults tuck. Oh, so high up in the air. You can see how just pushes down on that springboard. Almost up to the 7 metre, he jumps that high. Not the end result that he would have wanted. Just came out into that pike shape, the pike out of the tuck spin, and then just stayed a little bit in the pike shape, short of vertical. So not quite the end result that Jordan would have wanted, but like we previously mentioned, he will be safely through to the final, and hopefully we'll see the big scores in the final. Jake with another steady dive, being very impressed with him this morning, using those pikeless dives, but competing them all pretty consistently. That one just a hair short, just left his chest out a little bit on the entry, so don't see the bigger marks. And Connor finishes up with the same dive with one less twist, full out instead of the double out. And a lot of nice stuff in that. Good flick timing from him. You might notice the difference between when you see divers do this dive. Some of them choose to flick a little bit earlier, some of them choose to flick a little bit later, depending on how much time they have in the air. I think that flick timing there from Connor was pretty good. Just needed to repike a little bit harder to make sure he got all the rotation in. Now Lucas finishes up with an in-between half somersaults pike. He saved one of his standing dives for the end. And again, a lot of good stuff in there. Lucas's pike shape squeezed in really, really tight. Just on the takeoff, instead of standing up tall and making sure you get full height out of the board, he just throws his arms down a little bit and sticks his bum back. That just means instead of the dive going up in the air, it just drops away. So makes it a little bit more difficult to be comfortable where you are. So he's had to really squeeze into that pike shape and then not quite found his entry out of it. Rolled over a little bit from vertical. Lachlan with the back 1.5 somersaults with 1.5 twists, so lowered it down on the degree of difficulty, but very, very nicely executed. Next up, we've got Leon. Memorable dive in there today. His third round dive, forward 4.5 somersaults tuck. 85 points from him, so big score there. Finishes up with a 3.4 degree of difficulty with the double out. And all there, I thought it was going to just finish that dive off really nicely. Just instead of waiting and grabbing his hands, the last thing he did, just grabbed his arms a little bit early and just stopped his rotation. Just needed to have a look, straighten his hips out, and then grab his hands, and then that'll just help his awareness on the entry a little bit more. Just rush that entry, and then that's why we've seen it just stay a little bit short. Hamish with a forward 2.5 somersaults, 1 twist. Had a little bit of a panic there on the hurdle step. As he stepped down, his arms flapped around a little bit like he wasn't sure where he was going to land, but it looked to me as if his feet were in a decent position on the end of the board. So didn't quite need the panic. But the stuff in the air, not too bad at all. Judges just going to penalise him for that. Nathan with the same dive. Coming up to the back end of the competition now. not the competition Nathan would have liked to have. He's upped his ante in terms of his degree of difficulty from last year. Really added some harder dives, which do take a lot of time to be able to get used to doing in competition. And Todd, been impressed with some of his diving today. Another one that gives him the opportunity to really show off the class of his diving. And very, very well recovered. Hurdle step was a little bit over the end of the board, but he did really well to hang on. He stepped it up nice and steep, so his balance was good from the board. And then he had good awareness and a good entry as well. If I'm being heavily critical, maybe could have just had a little bit more toe point just to show off that extra little bit of form to the judges. But the entry itself, very, very good. Yuho finishes his list off with a forward 2.5 somersaults with 2 twists. So he did this same dive with 1 twist in the last round. So we go from a full out this time to the double out. And not bad at all from Yuho. I think that will see him through to the final. Or maybe, yes it will. 3-2-6 into 7th position. Dan Goodfellow is already ahead of him, so he won't push him back. James Heatley will be expected to go in front of him, so that will leave him just about in those qualifying positions. Oscar with a 4.5 somersaults with 1 twist to finish up his list. Very promising young diver. It's the hardest dive in his list, so again, as we see him develop, turn into a man and his strength increases, this dive will probably become one of the easier ones for him. He's got all the techniques in there to look really good as a diver. Similarly, Noah can be said the same. They've both used exactly the same list, with the exception of their second round dive, Oscar doing the forward 3.5 somersaults tuck and Noah doing it pike. So good to have a little bit of a comparison between those two. Both of them done some really good diving this morning. Obviously, with the lower degree of difficulty, they're not going to be featuring in this afternoon's final. And Maxwell with probably his best dive of the day, I would say. That was upright on the entry. His last few dives have been a little bit short vertical. Still doesn't get quite the scores that he would have wanted, just because the dive finishes a little bit lower on the water than perhaps would expect. Now James, penultimate dive of this morning's competition. Forward 4.5 somersaults tuck, so his biggest dive. Really nice hurdle step again from James. That's a big positive to take from this morning's prelim after the little mishap earlier on in the competition. Finishes off with 2 very, very good hurdles. A lot of dive to fit in there, so it just leaves it a little bit short of vertical. But sometimes when your body's not fully awake in the morning, it's very difficult to get all these dives in this afternoon. We'll hopefully see our divers' bodies loosen up a little bit, and hopefully see some big, big scores this afternoon. Dan finishing up our competition. Back 3.5 somersaults tuck. Another one that, if he does it the best he can be one of the best in the world, and very, very good dive from Dan. Doesn't necessarily jump the highest on this dive, but he spins so fast, and his line and entries when he comes out are very, very good. So another good dive from Dan over that 400-point mark. Up into second place. So we'll have confirmation of our results here. Yeah, this morning was a bit of a mixed prelim. Some really, really nice dives in there. Some that potentially our divers won't be so happy with. There you can see our results. Up in the lead, as we may expect from his experience and results over the last number of years. Jack Law takes the top spot. Second, Dan. Third, Ross. Fourth, Leon with that huge forward 4.5 some sorts tuck. Fifth, James Heatley. Sixth, Jordan. Seventh, Jake, our top guest. Yuho in eighth, another guest. So that means we will go down to the top 10 with the top 8 GB divers. Johan, unfortunately, won't get into the... Oh, I think we've had a mix-up on the... That's back to the start list. So you can see our girls training there. We've got the women's 3-metre synchro this afternoon. We've got a couple of different pairs than we saw this time last year, so it'll be very interesting to see how the girls get on. Now it's time for the boys to have a little bit of a rest before they get back in to train before the final. We'll try and get the remainder of the results back up for you in a second. In the meantime, you can watch the ladies train on the 3-metre. So here we go. If you're still with us, we've got our final results on the screen now. We've already just seen the top 8 previously. So again, Jack Law, multi-Olympic medalist, up in the top position. Very familiar names. Voss Haslam in there after a year out with a few injuries. Good to see him back in the swing of things. I'm sure we'll be hoping for more to come in the final. Down to 9th, Danny. 10th, Ewan. I think we might have had a bit of a mix-up of the results there. So Danny was actually in 11th position, I think, so he will just miss out on the final. Hugo and Todd take the last 2 positions in the prelim. So we'll have our 2 guests, Jake and Yuho, into the final, which takes the total competitors in the final to 10 divers. So for the crowd that are here and paying to watch, at least we get more for their buck. We've hopefully got a packed out crowd this afternoon to watch the finals. Down to my right, the stand was pretty full this morning. Hopefully this afternoon be similar and make lots of noise to encourage our divers and hopefully help them produce the best dives that they are capable of. So I hope you'll be back to join us this afternoon. We'll be back from 3:45. This afternoon's events kick off with the men's 3-metre final, and then they're followed by the women's 3-metre synchro. So hope to see you this afternoon. Hope you've enjoyed this morning's men's 3-metre prelim, and we'll be back later on with more action.